The crazy thing about being really good at one-handed is that you'll start to be faster than a lot of people are with two hands, using just one hand. That's one of the most common comments that I get whenever I post my one-handed solves. This guy solves faster with one hand than I do with two. And seeing that comment enough times gave me an idea. If there are a lot of people who solve with two hands in the same amount of time that it takes me to solve with one hand, then let's compare the two. And when we compare the two, we can figure out things that will let us get faster at 3x3 and one-handed. Let's get started. A while back, I recorded a one-handed session. Out of that session, I chose one particular average of 5 that I thought was pretty normal. Then I posted the scrambles on my community tab and had my awesome audience send me videos of them solving on those scrambles. I received nearly 150 submissions, which is incredible. After I was done collecting all of the submissions, I looked at all of them and chose my favorite based on 3 criteria. How close their average was to my one-handed average of 5, how visible the cube was in their video, and whether or not all 5 scrambles matched. And using all of those criteria, I picked my favorite submission. So without further ado, here is my 1187 one-handed average of 5 compared to a 1205 two-handed average of 5 by Elmir. Thanks again to everyone who submitted solves, and a special thank you to Elmir for letting me use his video. It takes a lot of guts to show a lot of people your solves like this, especially in this sort of comparison. So if you want to show him thanks, you can thank him in the comments or check out his Instagram, which I will have linked in the description. The first question that I really want to answer here is, how are these 3x3 and one-handed solves different? First, let's establish some key ways that the solves are the same. We're both using the same method, CFOP. Our average move counts are pretty similar, although Elmir's move counts are way more consistent, and our average turning speed is in the same ballpark, usually anywhere in between 4 and 6 turns per second. Clearly, what distinguishes my solves from his isn't what we're doing, it's how we're doing it. Let's start with cross. Elmir only solves on white cross, whereas I solve on white and yellow, but we still chose the same cross color on 3 out of the 5 solves. And on one of the other 2, I'm sure that Elmir would have chosen yellow if he could solve on yellow cross. That leaves only one solve where we legitimately disagreed about which cross color was better. But why is that? The reason is that when we're planning our crosses, we are looking for different things. When Elmir is planning his cross, he's looking for the way to solve all 4 cross pieces in the lowest number of moves possible, and he does a pretty good job of that. In this average, Elmir's average move count for cross was 6.8, and that's pulled up by a couple harder than normal cases. The way that Elmir gets his cross move count so low is by solving more than one cross piece at a time, or using the solution for one cross piece to make the solution for his next cross piece easier. A great example of this would be his first solve. When Elmir was inspecting on this solve, he saw the blue cross edge one move away from the bottom layer, the orange edge flipped in the top layer, and the red edge flipped in the bottom layer. This is a great opportunity to solve multiple pieces at once, because if you move a flipped edge onto the same side that you're going to turn to move an edge down, it will move the flipped edge into a position that's one move away from the bottom layer. Elmir did exactly that, and he did it for the orange and red edges at the same time. Doing D and U2 moves the red and orange edges onto the red side, setting them up perfectly. But because orange belongs one step clockwise of blue, and red belongs counterclockwise of blue, he has to do R' to insert the red and orange edges instead of inserting the blue edge right away. Doing the U2 to move over the orange edge also moved the green edge across from the blue edge, which is exactly where it belongs. So from here, all Elmir has to do is solve blue with R2, solve green with L2, and align everything with D'. Everything that Elmir did in this cross perfectly set up the next thing he was going to work on, which is what made this cross solution so nice. It was 8 moves, but because he inserted orange and red at the same time, he executed it as fast as a 7-move cross. But I, on the other hand, am only using one hand, which means I don't have a lot of the luxuries that Elmir has. So if I tried to solve my cross in the exact same way that he did, I would have to regrip a lot of times into some weird positions. And every one of those regrips costs precious time, so I need to take a different approach. Yes, efficiency is still important, but what's equally important for one-handed is making sure that all of the moves you do flow into each other so you don't have to regrip as much. With that in mind, this is how I approached the cross on Solve 1. The first thing that's really obvious and easy to solve is the blue edge. All that will take is an R move. From there, I can solve the orange edge with LF', which will also move the red edge onto its own side. The one problem is that from the position where I did the R, doing L and then F' isn't that easy. So you know what I have to do? I need to change my perspective. I might not be able to do LF', but by getting creative, I can do the same actions with slightly different moves. In this case, I can replace the L move with a wide R, which is much easier to do. It also effectively does a cube rotation, which changes the F' into a super easy U'. So I start off with my wide R and U', and then I insert the blue edge with R, and now I'm in this position. It might seem like there's not much I can do from here, but I've been keeping track of what has been happening to the green edge. At this moment, it's back here, and if I want it to be solved relative to blue and orange, I need to get it to right here. Luckily, I'm in the perfect position to move it closer to where it needs to be with a D2, but then I need to do an L'. Once again, I can replace L' with something easier to do. I do the only real regrip of this cross so that I can do a wide R' move with my index finger, which not only does the same thing as an L', but it does the cube rotation I need to get back to having my cross on bottom. From here, it's really easy to line my 3 cross pieces up correctly with a D', and then solve the red edge with R2 using my index finger. So that was the exact same scramble, the exact same cross color, but 2 very different ways of approaching the cross. That's why I like one-handed so much. It gives you so many opportunities to be creative with how you do things, and when you pull off something that works well, it seems almost magical. The other thing that distinguishes my crosses from Elmir's is that I often took my first pair into consideration when choosing how to solve my cross and which cross color to do. That's why I took 3 extra moves during cross to set up a free pair on Solve 3, and it's why I chose yellow cross on Solve 4. If you're using 2 hands, the white cross on Solve 4 is very easy, and Elmir noticed this and took advantage of it. The best way to solve this cross is a bit more awkward than I would like for one-handed, but I still would have done it if not for all the crazy things that I could do on yellow to set up for F2L. Obviously, I started off this cross by doing D to solve orange, and then R' to solve red, but from there I had some choices. In my inspection, I figured out that solving the green edge before the blue edge and throwing in 1 extra L' lets me build an X cross with the green and orange pair, and doing that also preserves the blue and red pair and makes the blue and orange pair super easy. All of that stuff would be completely doable with 2 hands, but the only time that it would be worth it, or that you would even notice it despite how easy white was, is if you're solving with 1 hand. But despite all of the techniques and optimizations I try to implement into my one-handed solves, my one-handed cross is never going to be as fast as someone solving cross with 2 hands. Elmir had a faster cross than me on 4 out of the 5 solves, achieving an average cross time of 1.37 seconds. For comparison, my average cross time was 2.13 seconds, which I think is respectable, not to mention that 2 of my crosses were X crosses, and that another one took extra moves to set up a free pair. I would still be slower than Elmir without those things though. It's a bit harder to compare my F2L to Elmir's than it is for cross because our different cross solutions led to completely different F2L cases. But from what I can tell, our F2L is still more similar than our crosses were. Unless you're getting really advanced and complicated during regular 3x3 solves, there's not much that you can do to make your F2L very different from one-handed solves. But to be fair, Elmir does a little bit of this complicated stuff, like when he does wide F move inserts into the back, which is awesome for 3x3 and not worth it for one-handed. Elmir had a few different opportunities in this average to use that insert, but unfortunately he only actually used it once. What does distinguish one-handed from 3x3 though, is that when I want to solve an F2L pair on the left, I have to do a Z rotation so that I can do the L moves as U moves with my index finger, and I can do the U moves as R moves with my pinky finger. This perspective shift isn't too bad once you get used to it, but it is an extra thing that you have to optimize. In my solves, I do that by trying to solve both pairs on the left in a row when possible, which means that I'll only have to do that cube rotation once. I did this pretty well on solves 1, 2, and 4, but I screwed up an opportunity to do it on solve 3, and on solve 5 this concept didn't really apply. Other than that, the concepts and strategies that we used for solving F2L were mostly the same. In general, the same concept of ergonomics being valuable as opposed to raw move count for one-handed does also apply to F2L, but because the moves and situations are much more restricted, there just isn't as much that you can do with it. After all, there are almost 200,000 possible cross cases, but there are only a couple hundred possible F2L pairs by the most liberal of standards. The last important thing to go over for F2L is EO, or edge orientation. For one-handed, it can be extremely beneficial to end your F2L with all 4 of your last layer edges flipped correctly. This is because cases where all 4 of your last layer edges are flipped incorrectly lose a lot more time one-handed than they do with 2 hands, and having all of your last layer edges oriented lets you use more advanced algorithms like COLL and ZBLL, which are more beneficial for one-handed than they are for regular 3x3. When I'm solving one-handed, I'll change the way that I solve my last pair to give me EO whenever it's convenient to do so, but that only came up once in this average. On solve 4, I had this case, and because I've seen this case so many times, I know exactly how to modify my solution to orient all of my edges. Luckily, doing this did actually give me a ZBLL that I knew, which I took full advantage of. Overall, I caught up to Elmir and even took the lead during F2L. I finished F2L faster than him on 3 out of the 5 solves, with an average F2L finish time of 6.81 seconds. Elmir is about half a second behind, with an average F2L finish of 7.34 seconds. That means I've saved over a second compared to Elmir on F2L alone. How did I do that? I'll show you in a minute. Once again, last layer comparisons are a bit harder to make because we got completely different cases. But what I can say is out of the 5 OLL and 5 PLL cases that Elmir got in this average, I would have done all but one of the OLLs and all but one of the PLLs differently. Yes, I use the same T, U, and L OLL algorithms as him, but in each of the cases where he used those algs, I would have done COLL or ZBLL instead. On solve 1, if I had the same last layer as Elmir, I would have done the OLL the exact same way, but there's no way I would have done his JPerm algorithm one-handed. Just like with every other step, the less you have to regrip and adjust to do an alg one-handed, the better, so I would have done this alg instead. On solve 2, instead of just doing OLL and PLL, I would have done this easy ZBLL case. This one is very simple, so anyone watching who doesn't know it should try to remember it for next time. And for the RA perm on that solve, instead of doing the RUF alg, I would have done the common RUD one, although either alg can work for 3x3 or for one-handed. On the third solve, Elmir got the lefty P-shape OLL. Although the alg he uses is perfect for 3x3 and completely fine for one-handed, I personally prefer to just mirror the regular P-shape alg. The difference in speed is pretty minor though. And for the V-perm, I use a completely different algorithm that lets me avoid cube rotating or doing any awkward F moves. I am trying to switch away from this alg though. Solve 4 is another one where I would have done COLL instead of the regular OLL, and once again I would have done the RUD alg for this R-perm. The last solve has another simple COLL case, and this G-perm is the only PLL algorithm that Elmir used that I would have used for one-handed. When you look at my average, you'll see that for the most part I use regular OLL algorithms for one-handed, except for the one solve where I got a ZBLL, and I use mostly standard one-handed algorithms for PLL. I do the Z-rotation RU-alg for this U-perm, the standard RUL algorithm for JB, the V-perm alg I already went over, and the wide move GC perm. All very normal for one-handed, not so much for regular 3x3. As far as last layer times go, Elmir has me beat by a little bit. He had a faster last layer than me on 3 out of the 5 solves, and his average last layer time was about half a second faster than mine, at 4:47 compared to my 4:98. Because I was about half a second ahead out of F2L, but Elmir was faster than me at last layer by about half a second, the sum of our average splits was really close. Adding up my average cross into F2L time with my average last layer time gives you 11:79, and when you do that for Elmir, you get 11:81. That's scary close. Yes, I know that I used StackMat and he didn't, but still, that's freaky close. So yeah, those are the similarities and differences in our solves, but that doesn't answer the really big question. How are our times the same? How am I keeping up with him when he's using 2 hands and I'm only using 1? Let's go back to what I said at the beginning. Both Elmir and I are using the same method, our move counts are about the same, and our average TPS is roughly the same as well. So with all that, you can see how our times are similar. Because the time that your solve takes is equal to your move count divided by your turning speed, and both of those numbers are about the same for both of us, our times are about the same as well. It's easy to see why our move counts are about the same. We're using the same method, and the number of hands you use doesn't change the number of moves that a CFOP solve takes. But how the heck am I keeping up with Elmir's turning speed? How am I turning as fast as him with only 1 hand when he has 2? The answer is, I'm not. The key thing to note here is that we're talking about average TPS, and average TPS has nothing to do with how fast you're turning at any given time. It's just the number you get by dividing your move count by the number of seconds your solve takes. If you look at my solves side by side with Elmir's, you'll see that he is actually turning much faster than me, but only when he knows what to do. The rest of the time, he's pausing because he needs to find his next F2L pair or recognize his OLL or PLL, and that time counts towards your average TPS as well. I, on the other hand, am actually turning pretty close to my average TPS. I just don't stop. Yes, I take time to recognize my OLL and PLL and stuff, but during F2L, pretty much the only time that I'm not turning is when I'm locking up. So how can I do this? I can manage to never pause during F2L because even though I'm solving in 11 or 12 seconds, I don't have 12-second solver level look ahead. I have 7 or 8 second solver look ahead because that's how fast I can solve with 2 hands. Being able to look ahead at those speeds means that when I switch over to one-handed, the look ahead is a breeze. Elmir is legitimately a 12-second solver, which means he actually does have 12-second level look ahead. His look ahead still does work quite well, as shown by his solves like his 3rd solve, but he just doesn't have the absolute consistency that allows him to never stop turning. But I'm sure that if he keeps practicing, he will get to that level. Other than that, the main thing that sets me apart are the techniques that I used during last layer, like the ZBLL that I got on solve 4, and the ZBLL that Elmir got but didn't do on solve 2. Obviously, 12-second solvers aren't expected to know all of these cases, but a 7 or 8-second solver would, and that puts me at another advantage. And this is sort of hinting at my last key point here. Yes, I can solve as fast one-handed as Elmir can with 2 hands, but he has so much more room for improvement than I do. When he does get better at looking ahead and start using more advanced last layer algs and turning faster and things like that, he's going to make a ton of progress. My solves are far from perfect. I lock up way too much, my last 2 pairs on solve 3 were awful, and I messed up what would have been a really good time on solve 5 by screwing up on this OLL. But those things can only save so much time, and it's nothing compared to what Elmir can save. In the end, 3x3 will always be faster than one-handed, and if 2 solvers have equal skill, the one using 2 hands will always be faster. So thank you for watching this video. This is legitimately the most excited I've been about making a video in a really long time. I found this really interesting, and I hope you did too. If you did, please like the video and please subscribe to my channel. I'm going to need all the help I can get on getting to 100,000 subscribers. So thank you for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day, I'll see you guys later. This is Brody, signing out.